Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the most anticipated event until August 31st. The Michigan football spring game this Saturday. We'll tell you what to expect. The head coach, Sherrone Moore, pays a visit to the professor. And the NFL draft is coming to Detroit in just a couple of weeks. It could be a record amount of draftees for the Wolverines. And how high does JJ go? This is The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, founder and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Congrats to Peak on celebrating its 10th anniversary. And inflation is keeping the Fed from lowering interest rates. Is this affecting your money? Now's a great opportunity to take stock of your portfolio. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwm.com. I am the pundit, Steve Clark. On the other side is the Professor, Greg Dooley. How are you, Professor?
Steve, I love your new intros. They're robust. And the one thing I would say is if you're listening, we got some new followers through the spring. So thank you. Follow, tell your friends. Thank you to my new friends up in East Lansing, of all places, where I spoke, Steve, at a church as part of a speaking group. And it was a bunch of Spartans. And I kind of did a little story of the history.
Well, they've been praying a lot.
They have. I think they were ready for some zingers. And the only zingers I threw were at other places around the Big Ten, not at State. And, you know, kind of their role in how college athletics was shaped. It was a lot of fun. So, welcome to the new followers. But we got some things to talk about. We got football coming up, Steve, finally.
And one of the things I'm glad about is they're waiting until April to do it. So many years, middle of March, not exactly a great environment, still very, very cold, very November football weather like. Maybe Jim Harbaugh liked it that way.
Well, you know what he said. They started on Valentine's Day because they love football. Yeah. Which, of course, is February 14th. So where's the spring game going to end up? So, yeah.
I don't think Sherrone Moore would have been ready to have the spring game start in mid-March or have the spring practices start on Valentine's Day.
No, I
need a little more time.
I, too, and those of you who are not in this area, you probably don't know that we had quite a cold snap that we're just breaking out of here where the weather's been gorgeous, and it's actually going to be hopefully a decent day for once where you're not kind of like going to the spring game despite the weather, right?
Right.
It sounds like it's going to be cool. And Champion Circle is doing something where you can go to the Glick and do a walk by and get your photo taken with several of the championship trophies. There's other varsity games going on. It's going to be quite a deal. Can't park on the golf course, by the way. I saw the note. So it's going to be kind of a madhouse here.
And Pioneer's charging.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. You betcha. Get here early. Look, if you want to support NIL and you want to get your photo taken, go sign up for the Champion Circle event. But we'll be out there, Steve. When are you getting out there?
Early in the morning. Make sure that everything is there, and then I'm ready to go and be able to perform any duties that might be asked to do along the way.
Are you going to do a show or anything like that?
I'm still waiting for the official news about how much,
Your answer
if at
was
all.
Great. Standing by to support whatever duties shall come my way in the way of speaking.
in the glass tube, ready to be broken in case needed.
Well,
you've had that happen to yourself.
Oh, yeah.
On the network before during rain delays. You have been a part of the emergency tube break glass.
Correct. You need to fill some time. Let's call the history guy. That's pretty much my career in speaking. Like bacon's not available. There's no money or there's rain. That's where they find dueling.
No money. Most important.
Yeah.
We're not paying anyone for this.
I am deep on the list of people they call, but I'm moving up a little bit. And speaking of, hey, U of M Club of Holland, Michigan has called me to come out in May to speak to their loyal alums at an event at a golf course. So that might be fun.
Oh, you get to play golf then?
They've offered, but it's too far out for me to know. Am I going to go out the night before? Am I going down in the morning? Am I going to be able to golf or just speak? But I'm looking forward to it. So you may do a show. Hopefully you do, because it would be really cool to have a little bit of that season vibe. We're going to get it inside the stadium, but to get the pregame stuff, maybe Joe's Garage, all that good stuff, it'd be fun.
And, of course, the network television is carrying it for the first time. They did Ohio State this past weekend. They're doing Michigan this weekend. What are the things you're looking for in terms of the spring game?
Well, I think I'll default to what a lot of people are looking for is JJ McCarthy's gone.
Yeah.
And what are we looking at here between Alex Orji, between Tuttle? Can we decipher the depth chart, right, of the quarterback? Who is getting the most reps? And for that reason, that's what I'm looking for starters. I'm sure Sherrone Moore is going to keep it to a similar thing. We've seen tweets where they've already drafted teams like Harbaugh started to do. So I do expect some competition. And whereas there was a point where the coaches were just kind of going through drills, we'll actually see some football, which would be great. So, and obviously for me, it starts with the quarterbacks. I wonder how much like Donovan Edwards is going to play, but I'm looking forward to see the other running backs get in there and do some stuff on offense.
One of the things to know is that this is just like one of 15 practices, and you don't know what they're doing on the other 14, and a lot of this is kind of going to go for show. There could be a guy who has 9 or 10 great practices but doesn't show it on Saturday. Immediately the public thinks this person's in the doghouse or not going to be great or whatever. It's just one of 15. I think one of the things that we may or may not see is that I think a lot of the quarterbacks have to go live a lot this spring. Like JJ McCarthy, solid number one quarterback. Let's not get him hurt. Put on that red jersey and let him have a full spring and a full summer to be able to work out at 100%. I don't think offensive coordinator Coach Kirk Campbell or Sherrone Moore know exactly who the quarterback is going to be because they all do different things very well, and then there's other things that they don't do so well. And they're just trying to figure these things out. And one of the things you got to do is throw them to the Wolves live and take a hit because you got to find out whether they can step up in the pocket, be able to take a hit, think on their feet in those type of situations. For me, I'm going to try to figure out what's very difficult to decrypt, and that is when one side of the ball dominates. It's difficult for me to untangle whether it's because one side is so strong or whether the other side is so weak. And specifically, is this defense that's expected to be great in 2024 on all three levels. They're expected to be so strong. But if we see them do such a lights-out job, I'm going to question, are they that strong? Or is the offense that is replacing so many starters, Greg, that weak?
That is the dilemma often in spring games. It's a great point. That's a great thing to look for. How do we figure that out? The other thing is, frankly, how many people are going to show up to this? I'm really curious. This should be the largest attended spring game in a very long time. How much is it going to actually feel like a game kind of atmosphere? I'm really curious to see that. Right
Temperatures, I think I'm hearing, is going to be into the 50s, so a little cooler than it was this past weekend, but a lot better than 30-degree weather.
It's football weather. Yeah, and again, there's been some pretty nasty days for the spring game. So it should be fun, man. Did you have a chance to look at any of the Ohio State games?
I did. I watched a good portion of it so far. And, I've been keeping up on all these teams, during the offseason whenever I can. I think Ohio State's defense is going to be lights out. They're going to claim that they got the best defense in the nation. Michigan's going to claim they've got the best defense in the nation. But I do think that the offense does have a step above Michigan right now without having to see Michigan play, during the spring or attend practices. Their offense, just about everywhere, has probably got a check mark over Michigan with the exception of tight end Colson Loveland coming back. He's going to be one of the best tight ends in the nation. The Michigan quarterback situation, is Alex Orji the number one guy? If so, he's only thrown one 5-yard pass in his collegiate career. It was a completion. That's great, but it was only a 5-yard pass. Donovan Edwards comes back, but Ohio State's got an all Big Ten first-team performer in Trevion Henderson, and they also got a all first-team SEC player from the transfer portal from Ole Miss in Quinshon Judkins. And then at receiver, Marvin Harrison's gone for Ohio State, but they bring in the number one overall recruit in the 2024 recruiting class, and that's freshman Jeremiah Smith, who they just raved about. Offensive line-wise, they got 2 returning all-Big Ten offensive linemen coming to Ohio State. Michigan's replacing everybody. But Miles Hinton was a starter at the beginning of the season in 2023. Michigan got also a third-team all-Big Ten player from Northwestern to be at one of the guard spots. Just because you didn't play a lot behind such a great offensive line doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad behind it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But one of the advantages of our team on both sides of the ball was how many players we did rotate through, including on the offensive line, and we've seen that the last few years. So we'll see some of those guys more.
What I do like about Michigan is that they've reversed the story. between the Buckeyes and the Wolverines. It's the Wolverines who are now the tougher team. They're the ones with the real confidence, not the portrayed ones in front of the cameras, in front of the media. And I think they have the better head coach.
Okay. There's no question about the confidence right now, but also the toughness, man. And they showed that in more ways than one last year.
Oh, remember, Ohio State claimed they're tough.
Right.
They claim they're tough. You go back to Ryan Day and after the Notre Dame game in South Bend about how tough they are. And they preached that all season long, and they still ended up losing to a team. Basically, everybody's knowing Michigan right now for its toughness.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
They're the torchbearer.
So how tough was it on your beloved son that is Purdue made it to the brink of college basketball in the NCAA tournament? I'm talking about Purdue. The speculation that we had a few weeks ago, could finally a Big Ten team get over the top?
No.
I think we both predicted UConn. I think I did. And sure enough, we have a repeat champ and kind of brushed away fairly easily, frankly. Purdue put a little bit of a fight, but tough one, man. It's got to be a tough one in West Lafayette.
Zach Edey had his biggest challenge, and he held his own over Donovan Clingham, who could be a top 5 NBA draft pick, could be a Pistons pick, depending on how they fare in the lottery. But to go back to answer your question, he's taking it a whole lot better than he did last year when they were a number 1 seed and lost to the 16th and became the second team ever to have that happen. That was a bad day. He was inside the house when it happened. It sucked. And I'm sure it kind of sucked for him losing the national championship game. As Michigan fans, we've been there. As a Michigan student, you've been there. Losing in 92 and 93 when you're so close, that is one thing. But it still stinks, but it's nowhere near as disappointing as going out as a 1 seed to a 16.
Right on. And I do think in retrospect, they're going to hang the Final Four banner. It's definitely a feather in your cap. And I know it was win it or bust. And again, Purdue is one of those teams where I felt like it's easy to root for the Big Ten now that it's Purdue.
Right.
We don't have these, like...
It's not Ohio State, Michigan State, or something like that.
Thing, frankly, and we've had our brush-ups with Iowa over the decades. We know this, Steve, but frankly, I think every Michigan fan was rooting for Caitlin Clark, like in Iowa in the championship, pretty much, right? Yeah.
No harm done to your own fandom for rooting for that. So
No. But speaking of other fandoms, Steve, I did spend some time recently in Bloomington, Indiana, which I know, for having spent 2 years there getting my master's degree, they have strong feelings against Purdue. And as we were touring the campus, it was a college tour, multiple shots across the bow out of nowhere to Purdue, including teasing them about losing in the championship game by an admissions director at one of, randomly, this woman took a shot. One of the tour guides took a shot. But yeah, that is part of that. I mean, we're so invested in our rivalries with Ohio and of course with Michigan State and at times Notre Dame. We kind of forget that it's pretty strong feelings there in the state of Indiana between those two schools.
There is more than one rivalry in the Big Ten. Maybe only one's being described by Fox and ESPN. But Indiana and Purdue, they were separated by a couple hundred miles. I knew some things through my son. At every kickoff, when toe meets leather, you hear the words, IU sucks.
That's what they all say when Purdue kicks off, basically. So
yes.
You're saying that's something.
They kick it off, and then it's finished with IU sucks before the guy catches the ball. And Indiana's trying to get back to their first Final Four in a long time. For Purdue, when you talk about raising their banner, it's going to be their first Final Four banner since 1980.
One of the things, we stayed at the Graduate Hotel, which is a chain of hotels, of course, on campuses. They have one here at Michigan, and they've decorated it with a mix of Mile and High / Hickory from the movie Hoosiers, right, theme. John Cougar Mellencamp, the Jack and Diane Terrace, like they're working that. And then the carpet has very much basketball. Like the carpet had basketball on the carpet, like a basketball net. But they have paintings up on the walls, of various themes and things like that. And one of them was a chair in motion, as in the one that Bobby Knight threw, depicted in a painting. It was really funny, as the artwork. So I got a kick out of it. Had a nice stay down there. Great people down in Bloomington, Steve. We did not go to Nick's and sink the Bizmarck, however. Thank you, Laura Bankowski, for reminding us that they're still doing that. In fact, they even fashioned little buckets that say sink the Bizmarck on them. So Nick's is still going strong. Thank you, Laura, for sending us that and that little shout out. It was awesome.
Greg, I could use a drink. Let's take one as we head to the locker room for halftime.
Sounds good. Don't sink the Bizmarck.
We find the German battleship that's making such a fuss. We gotta sink the Bismarck cause the world depends on us.
Pundits.
That sound means it's halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And Nick Hopwood is now joining us in studio with his take.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
All right, Nick. So as a professor at Michigan, I'm on kind of a tighter budget now, and cash is more important to me to pay the bills. And I've noticed we've been getting quite a bit more if you keep your money in a money market. So what are you telling your clients, and what are you seeing here?
Basically, I'm telling them this 5+% rate of return for idle cash means we have to look at where we are in the bank and say, we don't want any lazy money earning nothing. Let's see what we can do and move our emergency fund to the money markets.
I love it. I love that term, lazy money, because that's basically what it is. And some people would argue the bank's almost taking advantage of you because they're absolutely using that money to loan out to other people and make plenty, but not giving you a dime.
Yeah, they're loaning out at 7 and 8% right now. And, car loans, boat loans, mortgages, and they're paying you next to nothing on your checking. And, most banks are raising their savings a little bit, but, the online banks and the money markets is where it's at.
And that 5% is looking pretty good compared to what we've seen in September and October. So if you have a question or want to know more from Nick Hopwood, go to peakwm.com or call 734-681-7575. That's 734-681-7575 or simply peakwm.com. Welcome back to The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And Sherrone Moore, the head coach of Michigan football, decided he's got some time on his schedule to visit the professor and did so last week.
I don't know if he did, but he certainly came to the class. What a thrill, Steve, to have the sitting head coach, especially given the situation, come to my class on coaching and leadership. I've had some awesome guests. I've had varsity head coaches, so it's not to knock them.
You've had Hall of Fame coaches.
I've had John
You've
Beeline.
sat next to.
I just had Phil Martelli come in, and it was amazing. Steve, I was choked up at the end. Like, he was so good. I think he was on, literally, Coach Martelli is leaving town to go back to Philadelphia, where he's from. You guys probably know that. The movers are at his house, and he stopped in and gave his final, I think, leadership message to my class, and he's done it every semester. It was awesome. Okay. Sherrone Moore. Yes. So I started reaching out just to see if it would be a possibility. I think it was even before Harbaugh confirmed he was left, because I wanted to talk to Coach Moore about his unique experience actually stepping in and coaching last year when Jim Harbaugh was suspended. Don't you remember that time, Steve? That was quite a time.
Very well.
It does seem like a long time ago. So he came in, and we had basically an hour conversation. It was a Q&A. With questions partly driven by me, partly driven by the class on class themes of leadership. So, no, we weren't doing Chris Farley. Hey, wasn't that Rose Bowl cool?
You remember when you were with the Beatles?
As much as I wanted to.
Kind of similar setup. You two are on high chairs.
You remember when you won the national championship? Did you get any confetti? I did.
That was awesome.
No, we did. Yeah. We did not do that. And, of course, it's off the record, right?
In fact, I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
I'm his partner. He hasn't told me anything.
No, and I won't. In fact, our friend Dave Abloff was there, I think, to make sure everything was tidy that was being said. So I can say a couple of things. First of all, just to do this, he's obviously busy. I mean, there's still staff things going on. Obviously, players are in the middle of spring camp. It's his first time doing this. To do this says a lot. And I'm very grateful, obviously. But he told a ton of interesting stuff. And I did talk about some of the scenarios, like the Penn State game. We kind of walked through how we found out, his reaction, his messaging, his philosophy. Of course, there was the 32 runs in a row, or whatever the number one was. We speculate this is absolute courage for a leader stepping in to do that. We did talk about his reaction after the game. And we had a couple laughs about that, but he basically, I don't regret that. That was the culmination of so many people in such a tight group of people that clearly emotions came out. A couple interesting things like observations, I'll call it that.
Okay.
My hunch is that in his role as OC, the way Harbaugh ran the team, he had a lot of responsibility, not only in critical things like play calling, which we knew, but also authority. Like, it was, of course, Jim Harbaugh made the final decisions and he's the guy, but a lot of those decisions and a lot of the personnel stuff that they were doing really had to come through him. So I did get a sense where this really was in the OC position at Michigan, the way Harbaugh ran it. It was like a mini head coach. So I think he got a lot of experience for that, and it made him a natural fit, I think, to take the sideline against Penn State, Maryland, and Ohio State. He definitely sees, in my opinion, that as soon as he sat in that chair, he's more like a CEO now, if you know what I mean.
Right.
This is an organization literally with 500 plus people in Schembecker Hall, and then all kinds of other ancillary people, and all around the country. Like there's so many people that are impacted by the thing.
Well, we were made aware by what Dusty May said he's going to have to do, like the 2 to 3 hours a day, or 20 to 30% of his time, just talking with donors and NIL collectives.
Yes.
And did you think it's that much in basketball? Just wait till football.
I imagine. Now, the one advantage I think Sherrone has is they do have more infrastructure, but it's just more people. And people want his time. When you're the boss, you want to know, hey, I have an open door policy. People use it, okay, because they want to say the tone that they want to get in there and speak their piece, right? I did confirm Steve he's going to rock the skinny M hat.
Who are you wearing this evening?
Vivian Westwood.
What are you wearing?
Vivian Westwood.
The skinny black M hat, Steve, is what he's wearing. So I don't think that's a surprise because I think that's what he's been rocking, but I think he's going to wear that next year. And unfortunately, people are going to go, thanks, Dooley, but his blow-by-blow of kind of how the Penn State game went, how he found out, how he handled it, how he connected with Harbaugh after the game was really, really great. And above all, what a cool way to learn. I mean, we're hearing all these lessons in perspective. Yes, he talked about the differences between he and Jim Harbaugh. Some of them are obvious. Some of them are not so obvious. He even talked about how the office already, he has his imprint on it versus what Jim had, which is a bunch of Harbaughisms and slogans and, family references and all that stuff. So fantastic. Really, really a privilege to have him. I was really blown away.
I think Coach Moore and his assistants, who are mostly on the young side, except, for Coach Martindale, are going to be very aggressive on the recruiting trail. I think they're going to relate to a lot of moms and dads. I think they're going to relate to the kids at the same time. I am looking forward to seeing how recruiting, plus winning, should be able to help them. Now, that was something that I didn't always see in Jim Harbaugh, them having great recruiting rankings after winning. But at the same time, who cares? They still just won the national championship.
Your point is, he's going to be active. He's going to connect better. And the fact is, like he said some things, Steve, as me being at over 50, didn't quite understand, but the class did. Like,
okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he's talking about his J's, his Jordans. Like, I'm wearing Adidas. I'm trying to figure out what he's talking about. He referenced some music that he likes, and I don't even know what he's talking about. I think I've heard the artist's name before, but the class is all nodding, and so right there. But why do I say that? Because we're as interesting and odd maybe as Jim Harbaugh is. We're probably a lot more like Jim Harbaugh than we are like Sherrone Moore. And the recruits and the student athletes are much closer to Sherrone Moore, and that's very cool.
I think he's going to get after it, and I think we're going to be very pleased with what we see, and then we hope it translates all on the field. Michigan hockey. Talk about that for a moment.
Rough. And we've already seen a couple of the players head to the pros like instantly, which is amazing, or sign with the pros. But I watched a little bit of it. I happened to be down in Indiana when it was going on. They just got straight up pounded by Boston College, and that sucks. It sucks. But I'll say this. Maybe it's kind of like the Purdue thing, right? They lost at the end. Michigan kind of lost here at the end. Much better than not making the tournament. Much better than getting bounced out by State. So we still have that. And frankly, much better than the usual way we go out, Steve, which is a soul-crushing overtime bounce or weird puck or bad save or defensive breakdown. there is some solace in getting smoked.
I know. I know what you're talking about. One thing about the game, it looked like Michigan was carrying the puck in Boston College's end for a good portion of the game. It just ended up being 4-0. Michigan hockey fans, I think, are tormented just a bit. I mean, it's been 9 Frozen Fours without a championship. The good news here is that Michigan has made 3 straight appearances in the Frozen Four, and head coach Brendan Arado has been there his first 2 seasons. So it's not like the program is failing. And just 6 weeks ago, this was a team that looked like they may not even get into the NCAA tournament to begin with, but then went on a hot streak, got there, beat Michigan State, as you said. So there's a lot of, good things to point out in the victory. But if you're a Michigan hockey fan, just keep waiting for, that national championship that hasn't been there since 1998. It could be awfully frustrating. I would assume.
It is frustrating. But looking back, you'll take it. It's kind of like if you have a basketball season and maybe you're an 8 or 9 or 10 seed, but somehow you make it to the Sweet 16. I feel like that's the equivalent. And not to knock a Frozen Four. The problem is, of course, you're just 2 games away from the big one. The big one. So recruiting looks good in hockey from what I can tell, which has been the standard. In fact, we just keep sending guys to the pros, and Frankie Nazar, the guy who made that incredible between the legs pass, and the guy he passed it to, Gavin Brindley, in that same play, both declared. And in Frank Nazar's first game, he went right to the pros, literally straight out of college, right out of class, right to the pros, went on the ice for the Blackhawks and scored a goal in his first game. In fact, his first shot. So good for him. But Michigan just keeps putting guys in the NHL, and it's really hard to ignore that if you are a young hockey player who's looking to play.
It's a great selling point.
Speaking of hockey, boy, there is more and more and more momentum for a women's hockey team here. What is happening if you're not kind of on the ground here or care is that the regents, and again, the regents are like the board of directors of the school, have really gotten behind women's hockey. And I think they have the ear of President Ono. And one of our regents is Denise Illich. And if you know the Illich family, they happen to be the family that owns the Detroit Tigers and the Detroit Red Wings. Okay, pro franchises. And they have some money, of course, and they're supporting this. So stay tuned. It's a really difficult time for a team to earn varsity status because the college football world, the big-time college sports world, is kind of bracing for what they assume will be some sort of revenue sharing to the athletes that'll come out of the department budget or come out of the TV money. So this is the best time in the world to make a huge expenditure, which hockey would be. So stay tuned on this.
Michigan women's hockey have been doing pretty well at the club level, and they sit there and says, we would like to be able to play in the championship game, although we don't have enough funds to actually make the trip out there. So now we can't, it's just, that seems tragic. And then you see like Ohio State and Wisconsin women playing for the title.
Yep.
And Michigan is trying to find donors to be able to get them on a bus so they can go play somewhere.
And there are no varsity college women's teams in the state of Michigan, but there are a ton, as you might imagine, of high school and club level teams based in Michigan. So where are all the top recruits going? They're leaving. They're going to Wisconsin. They're going to Ohio State. They're going elsewhere. They're going out east to play women's hockey. So there is a first mover advantage in the state of Michigan if you can be that college that says, yeah, we're going to have women's sports. There's all kinds of other dynamics, Steve. Yost can barely support 2 teams. The visiting team locker room was horrible at Yost. There's all kinds of other considerations. Title IX comes into play on a few levels, assuming we're compliant with Title IX, meaning we have equal resources for men and women right now. If you add a women's hockey team, does that imply you have to add a men's volleyball team, to offset that? The other thing is you have to be real careful. If you have a men's hockey team, you got to make sure you're giving the women's hockey team the same amount of resources, which we're not equipped to do right now. We have a world-class historic ice arena, but it's not like a world-class locker room. There's a weight room, but it's not like North Dakota or even the Kohl Center, right? Ohio State. So those are a lot of things. It'll be an interesting storyline, Steve, as we podcast over the next several months. You mentioned the draft. It's coming up.
It is. A couple of weeks. It's in Detroit, which the more I think about it, the more I feel like I want to be a part of it, especially with a lot of Michigan players being drafted. One of the biggest stories in all the draft stories, whether it's locally or nationally, is JJ McCarthy's ascent 2 months ago, most analysts were predicting that JJ McCarthy would be a late second-round pick. And he is slowly moving up the draft boards to the point where most people think he's now going to be in the top 5. And it has been an interesting watch because, to me, I kind of felt like Biff with the Sports Almanac. And Jim Harbaugh says in January he's the number 1 quarterback in this draft. And then you just start watching this ascent slowly happen. And he hasn't exactly moved up the quarterback rankings a whole lot, still considered like QB4 in most circles. But in the last couple of weeks, as we're heading into the draft, there are people like Matt Miller of ESPN writing that if only 1 or 2 people said that JJ is QB number 2, I would dismiss it as draft noise. But he's saying more than that, has basically said he could be the number 2 QB and the number 2 pick overall to the Washington Commanders. This is the latest ascent that has gone on, and there's some other people from CBS Sports and from the NFL Network who are echoing these comments. So we'll have a lot more descriptive details leading up to that, but it is quite a story, and it has a lot of people nationally very interested in his ascent. And, of course, for everybody who hates J.J. McCarthy, those in East Lansing and Columbus, they basically take a picture of Zach Wilson, say he looks like Zach Wilson, J.J. McCarthy, therefore he's going to fail. That is their astute analysis on all of that. But it has been a wild ride from being a second-round projected pick to the middle of the first, to climbing to 8, to climbing to 6, to climbing to 5, 4, potentially 2 now. And watching experts whose reputation is on getting these things right, declaring that Caleb Williams out of USC and Drake May out of North Carolina are 1-2 since last May, right after the draft, and staying that way until the senior evaluations come out after the bowl season, have to kind of slowly change their tune because they can't dramatically change it because it makes it seem like all of their previous 9 months of work didn't mean anything, that it could be upended on a single weekend. They have to slow play this a little bit, and that's exactly what's happened. And it's been a funny ride watching these things happen. So we'll have more details on that in the coming weeks. Is late April in Detroit.
Yeah, it would be kind of cool to see all this play out if we can get there. So we'll have to keep an eye on it.
Meanwhile, there's a lot of Michigan players that could be in the late second round, early third round. You know, there's at least a half a dozen of those guys. People are asking about Blake Corum and what's happening to his draft status. And I've seen him ranked anywhere between 1st and 6th in running backs taken. And where is that going to get you? That's going to get you somewhere between late second round and possibly into the 4th round, depending on how that goes out. But I wanted to get to this because we're starting to run out of time, Greg. It occurred to me over the weekend that as much grief men give their wives, and it's significant grief, over them wearing a comfy blanket, a roaring fire, and a glass of wine while glued to the television set, watching washed-up actors and repeated storylines on the Hallmark Channel over the holidays.
Yes.
There's one thing that I think the women have over us as men that I can't defend, and that's when we shed a tear. Not over one shining moment that officially ends the college basketball season, Greg, but we both enjoy our golf.
We do.
And we certainly have become victim of the hype machine.
Right. Did John Tesh write this?
You would think.
It does get you right in the where
It's a tradition,
right in the feels, as they say.
unlike any other, as Jim Nantz has said for years and years and years. And yet we keep coming back to this thing that doesn't change. It's always the same. It's getting to me right now.
That's right. It sure is.
But here's the new thing.
We are glued to it. I am glued to it. I'm glued to ESPN Plus. They're on the range. Tiger Woods and his son Charlie. Glued. I don't know if you saw any of that. Charlie came out with them. He was looking at his why are we glued to the driving range?
As a subscriber to ESPN Plus, I went on there and I found out I could watch Tiger Woods just play his round of golf.
Yes.
Which is what I chose to do on Friday and Saturday. I just watched him.
This is, if you like this kind of stuff, it is one of the reasons to own ESPN Plus. They did a great job with it. Now, the Masters app itself does a good job. but ESPN Plus is pretty sweet.
But you could have chosen to watch Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy just individually play. You could decide to watch holes 4 through 6 and just watch all the players come through 4 through 6. And, of course, the favorite, Amen Corner, 11 through 13. Or you can just watch the regular coverage. And I'm ready for the live CBS coverage at 2 o'clock because I don't know a lot of the leaders that were going into this one. I was stuck with Tiger and thinking of better years in the past. I better get to know these guys. And so here comes the music and the sound as my wife walks in the room. She decides to want to have a conversation with me, so I put it on pause. When she was done, I rewound it all the way back to the beginning so that I could hear things like this. The March of the Masters.
Yeah.
And Greg, you can do this, right? I mean, there's the Swedish phenom, ranked outside of the top 5,000 just a year ago, Greg, not fazed by the cameras or the crowds, looking for his first green jacket.
Right.
Can you do this?
And who will remember the exhilarating Spaniard, Sergio Garcia, living La Vida Loca at Augusta.
And right now, hitting off the practice tee, the Kansas City Kid, whose parents' farm is in foreclosure. A win today would keep his family's 2-century-old farm around for yet another generation.
There's something else. I think I've ripped on poor Vern to you before over text. Steve and I are texting each other in the past. But I got to say, Vern Lundquist signed off. He's done 40 years of primarily the 16th hole, which is the par 3. But he's done other holes, and he's called some of the great moments in the tournament. You probably recognize some of them. But he did his final sign-off this time, and they made a big deal of it.
Yes,
yeah.
And they should.
And he was clearly choked up at the end. He delivered what he needed to do for the last group that went through, but they threw it back to him, and Nance did his thing. And he said it's been an honor and a privilege. It was just really slow, and it was really touching, Steve. I gotta say, back to the Hallmark moment.
Right.
I had a beer, not a wine.
That's what made me think of it.
I'm petting the dog. I don't need a blanket, but yeah, it was fantastic.
It's what made me think of it. See the walk-up 18 and the crowds gathering. I mean, this is like watching the Hallmark Channel, and the music, and it just seems like just insert name. And all the lines and the adjectives to describe around it can be rewritten.
Yeah, and it probably wasn't the most exciting final day or back nine for the golf nerds. And I know we're losing people here, but because the greens were really fast. So you didn't have a lot of eagles and birdies and great long putts and things like that. But it just never disappoints. And you did have guys, where the nerves got to them and hit the ball in the water and all that kind of stuff, which has happened over the years. And the right guy won, Scotty Scheffler, easily. He pulled away at the end. It was awesome. You made the point about the popularity of the women's game. The Masters is a Masters. I put it more in the category of the men's NCAA tournament. It never fails. But it helps when you have a villain or 2 or 3. And you do have a few villains out there in the live guys for a lot of us, like DeChambeau and certainly Patrick Reed. And for some people, Brooks Koepka, these guys who went to the live tour. But I will say this. Where was I at, Steve? I was at Tobacco Rose Cigar Shop in Ann Arbor.
North Carolina?
Yeah, with the owner, Chris. And Chris is like, I'm not spending $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to go there and sit in a place on Amen Corner. I'm going to watch it on TV. And if I want to know the gusto, I'm going to play the simulator, like the golf simulator. And I told him, I go, if you love this, you got to go. And I know everyone said this to you a million times, but here's probably a take you haven't heard. If you love to watch this, if you go, suddenly your viewing experience is amplified 5-10 times because all you're thinking about is your personal memories from that tee, from that green, from that fairway. It's pretty easy. It's not easy because it's very hilly, but you can easily cover the whole course. You put your chair down, you can come back to it. They respect that. You move around. But it helps your TV viewing experience, having been there, having known, that's where we were sitting with my dad. When they tee off at 13 and they go in the woods, I have a picture right there. I remember that. I remember when the guy hit it way over here, right near us, and we crowded around him like they do sometimes. And I know exactly where everything is. I know the par 3 course because I watched the par 3 tournament. I know all of it. And it definitely makes it better. And by the way, everything you've heard about the Masters, it is definitely Disneyland for adults, men, golf fans. Just the way everything is run so seamlessly and beautifully.
And it's like a Hallmark channel.
It is.
It looks like a Hallmark channel plot sometimes.
It is.
To me, it should be a national historic site, Augusta National. And in terms of sports sites, I think of the Kentucky Derby, which I've been there.
The Indy 500.
Place you got to go to. I have not been to the Masters, want to go to sometime.
Yeah.
Other historic sites got to be like Fenway Park or Wrigley Field.
Been to both. Been to all of these so far. This is good.
Good, yeah. And for me,
Rose Bowl.
The Rose Bowl for me was the National Historic Site that I felt like I knew everything about because I've seen all the drones and the aerial footage, but never actually set foot.
Yeah.
I'm getting to the point where I can watch the Masters where if I see a fairway, I think I know which one it is.
Yeah.
That type of. I'm knowing it that well, but not been there yet.
Yeah, it's the Matt Damon conversation and Good Will Hunting. Like, you can tell me about Michelangelo and how he painted Sistine Chapel, but you can't tell me what it smells like in there. And they, like it's that kind of thing, right? You can tell me about war, but you've never been there with your buddy dying, like that kind of thing. And that's what I would put. But it's absolutely beautiful. I thought you were going to say it should be a national holiday, like the Monday after, but
no, I'm not going that far.
Yeah, no, the coverage is amazing. I did find this out. I didn't know this. That they actually replaced the divots in the fairway between rounds, which I had never heard before, just like they changed the hole locations and they punched the hole and replaced it with a full piece of dirt. They do the same thing in the fairway. And someone showed me a picture of all of the grass ready to replace divots in the fairway, which is amazing to me.
Not the sand, but the actual grass.
The actual grass of the fairway, they actually have plugs that they unplug the divot, they put it out, and they put the clean grass and dirt and all that stuff like a plug.
Somewhere's a sod farm nearby.
Absolutely. And I put like Wimbledon in that category. I know it's not in the United States, but where it's hallowed ground for the sport. There's others. We all have
more so than Roland Garros.
Well, it gets back to this whole thing. I mean, we're sports fans, but these places are, for us, very akin to religious structures. I mean, it's just a fact. Again, June, Michigan Stadium, outside the gates. Michigan State, Sparty statue, like wedding parties, getting their photos taken, right? People spreading their ashes, which we've talked about. Like, it happens all the time, Steve. So anyway, I enjoyed it as always. And I enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we're at time.
We are very much at time. The next time you'll hear us, we'll review the spring game. But until then, a reminder, Michigan football, the undefeated and undisputed national champions. Go Blue, Greg.
Go Blue.